Welcome back, guys. This is our lecture on the crash, which is the event that kicked off the Great Depression, which would last, at least in the United States, from approximately 1929 to 1941, with a little bit of wiggle room there if you're talking about a nation other than the United States. The crash is kind of the nickname given to the stock market collapse that occurred in October of 1929. Specifically, it began on Black Thursday, which was October 24th, 1929, although the famous part of the crash occurred on October 28th, which is Black Monday. That's when the damage was actually clear and assured, and we'll talk what we mean by that here when we get into the actual crash event itself. So today we're going to explain several things. Number one, we want to understand why this happened, or to the best of our ability, understand why this happened. In fact, this is one of those things where I would say that people are still not quite sure exactly why this occurred. Then we want to understand what happened on that day. And then we want to start to talk about what happened afterwards, which is a huge topic. Don't worry, we're going to spend several lectures and some in-class discussion time talking about how the Great Depression worked, what it did, and what the United States government did to try and fix it. And ultimately, despite what the people that really like the New Deal might have you believe, the United States government couldn't fix it. In fact, the only thing that fixed it was World War II, which I think we can all agree is not necessarily a solution that anybody wanted, but it did provide the solution to this problem. So let's go back and talk about what caused this economic problem. Because if you remember from the last lecture, the 20s seemed to be a really good time. Everything's going well. Everybody is financially well off. People are moving from the farms to the cities. Everybody's going nuts, buying things. They're spending money like it's going out of style. So why was there a crash? Was there a crash just because people were spending lots of money? Is that how it works? No, not quite. But there are some contributing factors. And in fact, I like to think of these things as the hidden problems of the 1920s. Because last time we talked about the good stuff of the 1920s primarily. Lots of good things were happening in the 1920s, but there was some not so good things happening in the 1920s as well. And we've talked about one of them, that was the buying using credit. But buying using credit on its own is not a bad thing. It's just a trend that increased in the 1920s. It's going to cause problems when it's combined with the things that we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about the first thing. If you remember back to our World War I lecture, we talked about American food production growing astronomically during the years of World War I. In fact, between 1914 and 1918, U.S. food production increased by 300%. So they're producing more than 2 times as much food as they were before the war. And that production increase did not stop after the war was over because American food was being exported to a bunch of markets. Now, here's the problem, okay? And this is supply and demand economics, very basic economic idea that those of you who are studying economics now or studying in the future, you will be familiar with, is when there is more of a good, typically what happens is the price goes down. And the reason for this is something called the supply and demand curve. Typically, as the amount of supply goes up, the amount of demand goes down because everybody's demand is being satiated and therefore the price drops lower as there's things like competition. Now, normally in a normal product, the supply would therefore fall and, eventually there would be what's called equilibrium where the price and the supply would meet in the middle and the demand and the supply would meet in the middle and it would find its perfect price. And this is exactly how capitalist markets are supposed to work. The problem is food is one of those products that doesn't work like that. Okay. And when I'm talking food, I'm talking about farm produced items. I'm talking about wheat, corn, beans, pork, eggs, beef. These are farm products. And as farm products got more and more and more and more efficient, okay, as farmers got better at making these goods, the price got lower and lower, and that's normal. Okay, in fact, we could call this an economy of scale. As you make more and more beef, it gets cheaper and cheaper to raise each pound of cow. Okay, it's weird to think of cows as pounds of meat, but that's effectively what they are. If you're raising cattle for beef, you're raising a cow to get X number of pounds out of him, and you're going to sell X number of pounds at the supermarket for Y amount of money. So as you get more efficient at raising cows, your costs go down, and so the price falls. It doesn't cost as much to make the beef. You don't need to sell the beef for as much to make your money back. That makes sense. The problem is that food production got so effective, and there were so many farmers in the United States that the price actually fell too far. Again, there's only so much demand for food, there's only so many people. The problem is, how do you dial back production? Because here's the risk. Let's say that you, as a producer, okay, let's just say that you farm wheat, okay? If you produce 20,000 bushels of wheat, okay, and take it to the market, and so does every other farmer. The price of wheat is so low that after selling off those 20,000 bushels of wheat, you actually can't break even because the price is so astronomically low. Because everybody knows there's a ton of it on the market. Why would I buy from you at this higher price when I can go to this guy over here who's selling to it at a lower price? And you go, oh, don't do that. I'll sell it lower. And this goes on across the entire economy until wheat's being sold at barely above what it costs to make it. And there's just not any money in this process. Now, there is a solution, right? If you're making something, you can say, okay, well, I won't produce as much, and then there won't be as much available, and then people will want my product more. Okay, think about something. Let's make something limited edition and see if we can sell more of it. Okay, so we're quarantined right now. Let's make a limited edition Switch. We're only going to make 5,000 Nintendo Switches for the entire United States. What's going to happen to the price? Well, the price is going to rocket up, right? Right now, it's like $300 to buy a Switch, $200 if you buy the light version. There's only 5,000 Switches in the entire United States. People are going to pay a lot of money if they want that. Now, if they don't want that, then they're not going to pay for it. That's a different issue. But if you reduce the amount available, people will pay more because they want it. Here's the problem. You stop producing so much wheat. What about the guy next to you? Does he do the same thing? No, he probably doesn't. Or at least you couldn't predict that he's going to. Maybe you're super good friends with Farmer Bob over there, and you and him make a deal between the two of you. Hey, I'm not going to produce as much wheat. You don't produce as much meat, so we can bring the price back up, and that way we can make more money. And so you and Farmer Bob make that agreement, but Farmer Jill down the road doesn't like you guys very much, and she produces more wheat. And so the price doesn't change, except now you have even less money because you didn't produce as much. You don't have as much to sell, and you go out of business. Here's the problem. So the farms in the United States were in this unrelenting race where they were trying to produce as much food as humanly possible. They were selling it. They were barely making their money back. And it just caused this problem. And it started to ruin farmers. One of the reasons that farmers started moving from the countryside to the cities, last time I told you it was because they needed less help. Well, that was true in the beginning of the 1920s. By the end of the 1920s, people were moving to the cities because they went broke as farmers. They couldn't afford to do it. They literally couldn't make any money. They were planting lots of crops. They were bringing lots of crops to market, and those crops weren't worth anything. And so it wasn't worth it to farm. One of the most famous areas of the country devastated by this is the Central Plains area of the United States. And as people left, they left their farms, which were no longer that natural sod that had been there to begin with. And because these farms were being untended and not planted, the soil began to be churned up and it began to be taken up in these huge windstorms. And soon these massive dust waves would sweep across the Great Plains, and they were capable of even burying a building over several days as this dust rained down, and people's, teeth would turn black because of all the grit in their mouth, and they'd have to wash it out and all of this nasty stuff. And of course, as the sand gets all over the place, blocks out the sun, it would destroy your crops, and then you'd go broke and you'd leave, and your farm would lay there and it would turn into more dust and so on. This is called the Dust Bowl, and it devastates the United States in the late 1920s and early 1930s because really the only way to fix it is to deal with erosion, which was a concept that American conservationists were just really getting into at that time. Really hard to understand how that works for those early farmers, something that they were working hard to fix, but it took several years for them to do that. So there is a huge agricultural problem. Farmers going out of business. And at first, that doesn't really change things. But eventually, right around the time of 1929, enough farmers have failed that food prices start to go up again. Now, you might go, yay, the farmers are saved. The problem is so many farmers had already lost their farms that actually now the problem is there's not enough farmers. And you'd have to be nuts to go back out and be a farmer. Some people tried it. But pretty soon, if you make enough food to make a difference, the prices go back down and you run out of money again. So it was kind of a catch-22. If you did well, then there's too much food, you couldn't make any money, or otherwise food cost too much and people started to go hungry and they started to starve. So both ways, it's a problem. And this happens right in 1929. The farmers aren't affected by the crash, but it happens at the exact same time. One of the reasons for the crash itself is because many people were doing what was called margin buying. This means that they were actually taking out a loan to go buy a stock. Then they were taking that stock and they were selling it again, and they got the margin. The difference between their loan and what they had brought in is what you would make. And so sometimes as much as 2/3 of the stock was being bought with loaned out money. So effectively what people were doing is they were gambling with loaned money. Can I tell you that that sounds like a really bad idea? Okay, imagine going to a casino and borrowing $500 from your friend and saying, hey, I'll pay you back. All right. I mean, you're gambling with borrowed money. Not a wise decision. What happens if you lose it? What are you going to do? How are you going to pay them back? You don't have any money. Okay. You can't borrow more money to pay other money back, although people tried. Remember, we talked about that last time? People were also wildly speculating. People at this time were willing to throw money about just about anything that was on the stock market, even businesses that definitely were probably not financially wise or financially good decisions. People were just throwing money at different things and hoping that it stuck. That's kind of the idea. Hoping to make a quick buck, hoping to get rich by doing this. And unfortunately, it's just not going to work out because what happened in October is going to wipe many investors out entirely. Now, all that being said, October 1929 was not unpredictable. There were rumblings in the United States economy and there were rumblings in the British economy that might have told you that something wrong was going on with the economy. In March of 1929, there was a downturn on the stock market. The US stock market experienced a fairly major dip, but the next day it resurged again. Now, that happens very frequently in the stock market. It'll go up, it'll go down, but this was a fairly serious surge. And the only reason that it went back up is because the next day, a major bank in New York offered to buy shares of different businesses at above market value. In other words, we're so confident in the market, this bank is saying that we're willing to spend more of our money to buy shares. So we're willing to buy them if you want to sell at above what they're worth right now. And that gets people to sell their stocks, reinvest their money in the stock market, and kind of encourages stability again. But the problem is the fact that a bank had to step in and stabilize the market tells you that there's something wrong. And again, hindsight's 2020. So it's a lot easier to say now, oh, those guys should have known that something was happening. So don't get me wrong. I don't think that I'm smarter than all of the people working in 1929, but there was a rumbling. Now that we can look back, there was some problems in the economy. As I mentioned, the farm industry was majorly hurting. We also see declines in things like automobile purchases and steel consumption in the U.S. as big businesses don't have quite as much purchasing as they were expecting. And again, this is primarily because of farmers losing their farms, having to come into the cities. This is causing different problems. So the actual economy of the U.S. is slowing down, but the stock market did not slow down at all. In fact, the stock market began to grow rapidly from about July to September of 1929. It actually grew by 20%. That is a big difference. If you had $1 in the stock market in July, you had $1.20 in the stock market in September. That's pretty good. 20% on your money. If you could get 20% in 3 months, you would probably be the world's richest investor if you could do it consistently. That is good money. In September, we do have a stock collapse in Britain, but this stock collapse didn't concern too many Americans because it was primarily for fraud. Many big businessmen in London got arrested for fraud, and so that sent the London Stock Exchange into some tumult. It dipped pretty significantly, but most Americans just said, oh, well, this isn't a real issue. This is just people getting nervous. And here in the United States, we're not going to worry about that so much. And so the investment in the stock market continues. Finally, on October the 24th, the crash that had been rumbling, the shocks that had been being felt began to occur. Now, why did it occur? The actual reason that people began to sell is not known. We don't know why people began to sell. Maybe it was just one person getting nervous about a stock that he had borrowed on, decided to sell a little early. And that caused another person to sell a little bit early. He just wanted to get his money and get out while he was ahead. And slowly on this Thursday, people began to see, oh, people are selling. People are selling. That guy sold for under market value. Okay. Why did he sell for under market value? That's odd. Is that stock going to drop in price? I have that stock. Do I want to sell it now? Do I want to sell it undervalued to get rid of it? Or do I sell it at full price and then it drops in value huge and I lose all my money? What do I do? So basically what happens is as the day goes on, people get more and more worried and they begin selling and selling and selling and selling. In fact, they begin selling so fast that the guys who change the numbers on the board at the New York Stock Exchange literally can't keep up with the numbers. And there's guys on telegraphs and even telephones calling stock brokerages all across the nation trying to update the stats, and they literally can't update them fast enough. And so as you walk in after work to do some stock trades, you see the numbers are changing rapidly. You're going, oh no, all of my money in the stock market is being eliminated. I got to sell right now. And by doing that, you contribute to the problem. It's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. People get nervous the market's going to collapse, so they sell all their stuff. And by selling all their stuff, they freak a bunch of other people out who all sell their stuff, and they cause that market crash. So oftentimes in economics, when it comes to markets, financial markets, foreign currency markets, stock markets, the name of the game is predicting what people will do. Not necessarily what the currency or the thing you're selling will do. That's part of it. But sometimes you have to predict what other people are going to do. And that's kind of how you make your decisions. And that's what was happening here. People were worried. People were freaked out. And they're going to sell. Now, the next day, there's kind of a bounce back as big banks and the Rockefeller family move in. And again, they buy shares at above market value. They say, hey guys, let's be confident in the economy. We're going to buy your shares back. And we have a big resurge on Friday. So if that's all that happened, we would never talk about that day. That would be an inconsequential blip on the American stock market. Only the most hardcore of economic historians would probably have a clue about that dip. Unfortunately, over the weekend, there's big problems. Those big problems come from those little local stock houses. The prices hadn't been adequately changed on Thursday or on Friday. Everything was so chaotic. So many businessmen, as they talked to each other over the weekend, decided, you know what, this is too much risk for me. I'm concerned. I'm pulling everything out on Monday. As soon as the markets opened up on Monday, there's a massive crash as people sell their stocks basically for anything they can get and get out of the market with their cash. We have a massive drop. In fact, it is the largest single drop in United States history. In fact, it's close to 13%. It is a massive loss in wealth and currency. And unfortunately, the next day, it continues to drop. In fact, it goes to a total of more than 23% in 2 days. So again, I told you, if you made 20% over 3 months, you were doing really good, right? You had $1 in the stock market, you have $1.20 by the end of September. Yeah, now if you still had that $1.20, you'd be back to $1, and it occurred in 2 days. 2 days. Obviously, this is going to be exponential. People are worried, they're losing money. People say, you know what, I want to cash out and get out. So there's a financial panic. People are freaking out. Banks are freaking out because, remember, I told you that people had taken stocks and bought them on loans. Well, what happens when he can't repay the loan? What do you take from him? He's got a stock that might not be of any value anymore. You've been loaning out money for things that don't have any real value. And if the stock market's collapsing, the value that he borrowed against is gone. Let's say that he took out $1,000 and the stock's trading for $700. He was intending to make a little bit of money over the loan. Now he couldn't even give you the loan payment back if he sold the stock right now. What do? Investors are defaulting on loans. You go after them in court, you'd have to take thousands of people to court to get all your money back. Banks are in a panic because all of this money that they loaned out, that's gone. And as panic spreads throughout the country, people are starting to eye their banks and go, man, maybe I should pull my cash out so I have it. And that's going to lead to events that happen a little bit later on in the Great Depression, where we have bank runs, which the most famous bank run for an American audience illustrated is that in It's a Wonderful Life. If you've watched the movie, or if you want to look it up on YouTube, look up the bank run and It's a Wonderful Life. You see people, they're just trying to pull their money out. They want that cash. They want to be confident in the cash, and they want to pull it out. And those runs on the banks, they occur a little bit in 1929, not too badly in 1929, but in the 1930s, they begin to accelerate and happen more and more and more and more. And that's going to cause a whole slew of other problems that we'll talk about next week when we talk about the Great Depression. We don't have time to talk about it today. What happens? Well, number one, this financially ruins a number of people in the United States, and most of these people are fairly wealthy. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, there's not that many wealthy people in the United States. Why does that matter so much? Remember, these wealthy people are the ones that are funding businesses. They're the ones making the big ticket purchases. They're buying appliances. They're buying cars. If they're not buying anymore because they don't have any money, the people that make those things might not have jobs either. Okay. And to be honest, with the coronavirus, we are experiencing a very similar situation. Just think about it. As of when I'm recording this, the big automakers in Detroit are shut down. If they can't make cars, okay, anybody that they buy from no longer has a job either. So let's just say that you worked for a company that supplies rubber parts to cars. Well, if there's no cars being made, then suddenly your biggest purchaser of your rubber parts isn't buying anymore. Do you have a job anymore? Right? That's kind of the question. The same thing occurs in the United States in the 1929 crash. These guys with all this money who had been buying all these things don't have any money anymore. They can't buy the things, which means that you don't have a job, which means suddenly you're out looking for a job, along with hundreds and then millions of other men all at the same time. There was also a psychological problem here. People in the economy, even without money in the stock market, said, oh no, the stock market crashed. We are in for some economic hard times. I'm going to change my pattern of behavior. And humans do this very consistently. And unfortunately, sometimes the way we change our behavior, while it's smart for us, it hurts us as a society. Okay, so people go, oh, wow, I am not going to spend any money I don't have to. But then we start to create more problems, right? You're like, oh man, I would have gone out and I would have purchased a new jacket, but times are now tough. Well, what happens? That money that you would have given to the jacket maker instead sits in your safe waiting for a use, and the jacket guy goes out of business. And you see him go out of business and you go, oh no, I need to protect my money even more. And you don't buy other things that you would have bought otherwise, not things that you need, but things that you probably would have purchased. And those guys go out of business, right? So we have this horrible cycle as people hold on to their money because they don't want to go broke, which causes a whole bunch of business failures. Now, this isn't to blame the people that are saving the money. They're doing what's smart for them. But what we don't realize is that sometimes doing what's smart for us might hurt the economy at large. This is, by the way, called the prisoner's dilemma. Do I do something that helps the group, or do I go with something that could help me massively? And psychology experiments, unfortunately, have showed us that normally people go with the one that will probably benefit me, even if it hurts everybody else. And then, of course, if it hurts everybody else, it actually hurts me too. If you've never heard of the prisoner's dilemma, I encourage you to go look it up on YouTube. I wish I could go through it in person. It's really something that's hard to go through just in a video here of just me talking. But if you've never seen a video of the prisoner's dilemma, you should look it up. It's really interesting. So we've got all these problems in a financial way. Now, we're going to close right there. Okay, we've had this big financial disaster. The question is, what happens now? And that question is going to be really important because we have a new president. We have Herbert Hoover, who is quite the guy. He is a guy that is so interesting that he's definitely worth our time to talk about next time. How is he going to respond to this crisis? And can he fix it? Well, the answer to both of those questions is he doesn't know. And the answer to the second one is he can't. And in fact, to be honest, I don't think any president was capable of dealing with the problems. Even FDR, who seemed to be fixing things, actually saw a slump in the economy again after he took the presidency. So this is a really complex problem that even the smartest guys, and Herbert Hoover was really smart, couldn't fix. And so we'll talk about the response and how things got worse and what that did to the United States next time.